Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm here to present a topic on renal tubular acidosis. Basically, I'll tell you why we need to handle kidney, why we need to handle acidosis, and how kidney does it, and what are the abnormal channels involved, and how to diagnose, how to approach, and few case studies. Okay, a bit lengthy and a bit boring, so please bear with me. So, what is renal tubular acidosis? It basically arises from the kidney's inability to actually excrete acid, and or it is not able to reabsorb the bicarbonate which is being filtered, or it is not able to generate new bicarb. Okay, this results in a clinical syndrome where you have presence of normal GFR, that is serum creatinine is normal, and you have a normal anion gap metabolic acidosis, that is you have hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis, and you have impaired urinary acidification. This is the syndrome complex. Okay, it was first described by Reginald Lightfoot. Actually, he found some calcific infarction in kidneys of infants who died of dehydration, and he thought it was due to salt wasting kidney was the cause. But he never found out acidosis at that point of time. But later, Butler actually found out these children had acidosis, dehydration, and calcification of renal tubule. Finally, Butler's colleague Albright and Riefenstahl had given a complete description of the clinical picture, which we now call as distal RPA. And where does the acid come from? We don't eat or drink acid. Then how is it being generated in our body? Actually, the metabolism of all food particles, that is in the tricarboxylic acid cycle, we know everything is being converted to carbon dioxide and water, and finally this carbon dioxide is being released through a respiratory system. So basically, metabolism of carbohydrates and fats generates volatile carbonic acid, and which is being excreted to the lung. Whereas metabolism of proteins leads to fixed acids. Okay, and this actually consumes the serum bicarb buffer, and the bicarbonate is being exhausted, and the fixed acid load has to be excreted by the kidney, and the lost bicarbonate has to be regenerated by the kidney. So, an adult who is on average high protein diet, high animal protein, actually generates 15,000 milliequivalents of volatile acid, and roughly about 70 milliequivalents, that is 1 milliequivalents per kg per day of acid as fixed acid. So fixed acid needs initially neutralized by the buffers, as I mentioned, and later it is being excreted by the kidney. And kidney excretes H+ by buffering with ammonia and phosphate, which I'll be telling you in the next few slides. So what is the stress on acid-base handling? It's basically like our extracellular fluid just contains 40 nanomoles of H+ ions. Only then the pH is maintained at 7.4. Whereas intracellular fluid contains 80 nanomoles. But you should know, as volatile acids, we generate about 15 billion nanomoles per day. And as fixed acid, we generate about 70 million H+. So now you know what is the stress on our acid-base handling. Okay. So what is the role of kidney in acid-base handling? So it has to reabsorb all the filtered bicarb. Whatever is there in plasma, it is being filtered through the glomerulus. And the proximal convoluted tubule, which has the stress of absorbing all the bicarb which is being filtered. About 80 to 90% of bicarb that's being filtered is reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay, so next is regeneration of bicarb through, which is lost through metabolism. So first what it does is that it secretes H+ into the lumen, And this H plus combines with the bicarb in the luminal fluid, and it is being converted to carbon dioxide and water, and this carbon dioxide diffuses, and this is being again converted to bicarb and reabsorbed. I'll show you in the next slides. And other methods are, it actually H plus, which is being secreted, combines with the buffers in the luminal fluid, which forms a titratable acid. It combines with the ammonia, which forms ammonium, and this generates bicarb. So what is the importance of urinary buffers? You have a buffer in serum. Why do you need a urinary buffer? Is it all needed? It's basically, the urinary buffers are also called as titratable acid. The maximum acidic urine what you can produce is just up to pH of 4.5. Okay, but at that pH, the H plus concentration is just 10,000 nanomoles. You have to excrete 70 million nanomoles. The only thing which can excrete as H plus is just 10,000. So hardly, it is not possible for us to excrete all the load as free H plus ion. So you need a buffer which is ready to accept the H plus. Okay, so that buffer is called the titratable acid. Okay, and next is the other load of proton is being excreted through ammonia. Okay, so under normal conditions, 1/3 to half is being excreted as titratable acid, and half to 2/3 is being excreted as ammonia. Right. So in a nutshell, renal acid-base homeostasis can be broadly divided into two processes: reabsorption of the filtered bicarb, excretion of fixed acid, and excretion of ammonia. Okay, these are three main processes. So what is this net acid excretion? What is the capacity of the kidney to excrete? What is the amount of acid that is being excreted by the kidney per day? So that will be equal to the fixed acid. That is the titratable acid. There is a phosphate. Basically, it contains phosphate. Next is the amount of ammonia minus the bicarb. Whatever is being, the base that is being excreted is minus. Okay. So net acid excretion is titratable acid plus ammonia minus bicarb. Just remember this equation. So, as a titratable acid amount is fixed. It is basically the amount of phosphate which we can excrete is fixed. So you can't manipulate this to our requirements. Like you can't increase phosphate requirement, I mean excretion, etc. So it is almost fixed. So the amount of titratable acid can be increased or decreased. This basically depends upon the ammonium. Okay. The titratable acid is fixed, and a decrease in net acid excretion is basically because of either decrease in ammonia excretion or there is increased bicarb excretion. Clear? Okay. So, for example, in an adult, either because of acid loading diet or the patient develops a diarrhea, just see the amount of ammonia that is being produced. Ammonia. In control subjects, it's just 2/3. But you can see that it can be increased to several folds in case of stress. So when the patient develops diarrhea or when the patient has got any acidotic process happening, actually if the patient has got normal kidneys, he can increase ammonium excretion increase ammonium excretion by several folds. Okay. So this is what I told you. The total filtered bicarb per day will be, plasma bicarb is 24 milliequivalents. Glomerular filtration rate is about 180 liters per day. So roughly about 4,000 to 5,000 milliequivalents per day of bicarb is being filtered, and 85 to 90% is reabsorbed by the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay, the rest is being reabsorbed in the thick ascending limb, distal convoluted tubule, and the early part of collecting duct. So this is what you can see: 80% of bicarb is being reabsorbed in the 80% by the proximal convoluted tubule, 15% by the thick ascending limb, and 5% by the distal tubules. Okay. This is a very important feature. This is the acid handling in the proximal convoluted tubule. The abnormalities of these channels will actually tell you what is the cause of your RTA, proximal RTA. See, you can see carbonic anhydrase 2 in the cytoplasm of the proximal convoluted tubule. It actually combines with carbon dioxide and water to form carbonic acid, which dissociate to H plus and bicarb. And the bicarb is being sent to the bloodstream by the basal sodium bicarbonate cotransporter. Okay. For 3 bicarb, 1 sodium will enter the bloodstream. And the H plus is being either secreted through the NHE3. This is sodium H plus antiporter. There is sodium inside the cell, H plus outside the cell. And you have another vacuolar ATPase, H plus ATPase. This actually kicks out the H plus inside the tubular lumen. This is what it does. Okay, what happens inside the tubular lumen? You can see carbonic anhydrase 4. Okay, here the H plus combines with the filtered bicarb. Again, it is converted to CO2 and H2O. The CO2 diffuses inside the cell, again combines with H2O over here to form the carbonic acid. That's how the bicarb is getting absorbed. So abnormalities in either sodium bicarbonate cotransporter, NHE3, or vacuolar H plus ATPase, or carbonic anhydrase 2 or 4 can actually result in RTA. Okay. Yeah, this is a simpler version. Okay, you can see the sodium bicarbonate cotransporter. You can see the NHE3 or antiporter, sodium H plus antiporter in the luminal side. You can see the H plus ATPase, carbonic anhydrase 2, carbonic anhydrase 4. Right? There are various factors actually affecting the absorption of bicarb in the proximal convoluted tubule. Basically, it is the extracellular fluid volume, metabolic acidosis, and most importantly, it is hypokalemia. Hypokalemia actually increases bicarb reabsorption in the tubule. And there are so many other hormones actually functioning, like the parathyroid hormone, angiotensin 2, everything. These all tries to conserve bicarbonate. Basically, it increases sodium reabsorption. Along with that, it increases the bicarbonate associated. Okay. So decrease in extracellular fluid volume increases angiotensin. Angiotensin, in fact, increases bicarb reabsorption. Fine. Other buffers in PCT, that proximal convoluted tubule also has some buffers. Basically, I want you to remember this citrate. Okay, that's a citrate buffer. The citrate is a tricarboxylic acid. Okay, this is being converted to a dicarboxylic acid. And this citrate reabsorption will be increased in acidosis because the H plus that is being secreted by the luminal side proteins will combine with the tricarboxylic acid to form dicarboxylic citrate, and finally that is getting reabsorbed. So acidosis actually favors reabsorption of citrate. Just remember that this is one of the buffers in PCT. Apart from that, you have the phosphate buffer, etc. Not going to detail of it. Okay. So what happens in the distal tubule? Okay. Distal tubule, it is basically for the fine tuning. Okay. Fine tuning of acid-base excretion happens in the distal tubule. You have 3 types of cells: alpha cells, beta intercalated cells, and you have the principal cells. Alpha intercalated cells is basically involved in H plus secretion. So this is the alpha intercalated cell. In this figure, you can't see, actually there is a cytosolic carbonic anhydrase 2, which actually generates the carbonic acid H plus and bicarbonate. The bicarbonate is being sent to the bloodstream by what is this? AE1. What is it called? Anion exchanger. Anion exchanger. So bicarb inside, chloride outside. So chloride is again recycled. You can see there is a cell. So if there is no chloride, this mechanism won't work. So this chloride is getting recycled. Okay. And the H plus that is being produced has got same H plus vacuolar ATPase, that is H plus ATPase, which secretes H plus into the luminal side. And you have K plus H plus. The initial was sodium H plus antiporter in the proximal convoluted tubule. Here you have potassium versus H plus antiporter. H plus K plus antiporter. Okay, fine. That is the ATPase actually. It works under NH. Right? So the secretion of H plus in the apical H plus ATPase is the main thing that secretes H plus in the alpha intercalated cells. Inside the cell, cytosolic carbonic anhydrase actually generates carbonic acid. The bicarb thus generated is being taken up inside the bloodstream. But one thing you never asked me, where is the luminal carbonic anhydrase 4. Can you find anything over there? No. You can't find a luminal carbonic anhydrase 4. Okay. Why is it so? Because by the time it reaches the distal part of the tubule, there will be hardly any bicarb left for reabsorption. So in the late distal collecting duct and the early part of the cortical collecting duct, you have carbonic anhydrase in the luminal side. Carbonic anhydrase 4. That is a luminal carbonic anhydrase 4. In the later part, there is hardly any bicarbonate left for reabsorption. So there is no carbonic anhydrase 4 in the luminal side. Whatever bicarbonate that is being generated is being reabsorbed. But it is exactly at this point where you can actually regenerate the lost bicarbonate and actively secrete H plus into the tubular lumen. Can you get it? Okay. So, yeah, as I told you, we have the anion exchanger, and alpha intercalated cell is present throughout the medullary and the cortical collecting duct. Okay. So, what are the things that actually stimulates this H plus ATPase action? It is basically systemic acidemia, hypokalemia, and as I told you, there are various hormones. Basically, most important thing is aldosterone. Okay. I told you something about ENaC. ENaC or epithelial sodium channels. Epithelial sodium channels are channels which are present in the luminal side of the principal cells, which I'll show you in the next slide. Actually, this actually actively absorbs sodium, and it active absorption of sodium causes luminal electronegativity. Just remember that sodium goes inside the cell. Whatever ion that movement of sodium causes lumen to be electronegative. So some ion has to leave from the cell, that is from the cytoplasm. Something has to enter the lumen in order to prevent this, neutralize this electronegativity. I'll show you. This aldosterone actually stimulates ENaC and H plus ATPase. And aldosterone deficiency causes sodium wasting because ENaC channel won't work. It causes acidosis because H plus channel won't be stimulated. Okay, so, and it causes hyperkalemia. Why hyperkalemia? I'll show you. This is the distal collecting duct. Here you can see the ENaC channel. Distal collecting duct, late part of distal collecting duct, you can see the ENaC channel. And this is the thiazide sensitive sodium chloride cotransporter. And you can see the Barton, the chloride alone channel, which actually influxes chloride into the basolateral side is Barton. Just remember the names. I just want you to remember the names because all these are important in. Okay. Just a bit more complicated. Okay. Just show the important channels. You can see the ENaC channel over here. Okay. This increases sodium absorption. So the increase in sodium absorption, the electronegativity causes the potassium to be secreted to the lumen. Okay. ENaC is stimulated by aldosterone. So increased sodium absorption. Hence, there is increased potassium secretion. Not alone potassium, H plus is also being secreted because aldosterone increases H plus ATPase activity. Just remember, only then you know the mechanism by RTA. So at a stretch, you can see all the channels together. This is, what is this? Alpha intercalated cell. What I told you, H plus ATPase, H plus K plus ATPase, H plus ATPase, carbonic anhydrase, anion exchanger. Got it? This is the ENaC channel, epithelial sodium channel. This is in the principal cell, stimulated by the mineralocorticoid receptor, aldosterone. Okay, this secretes potassium out. Where is this ammonia coming from? Until now, we never discussed anything about ammonia. But ammonia is a main acceptor of H plus ion. So how is this being produced? How does kidney produce this ammonia? Actually, ammonia is being produced by the proximal cannulated tubule. It is obtained from, it is produced by decomposition of glutamine. Glutamine is an amino acid. It's being absorbed into the cell. And glutaminase acts on glutamine, converts it to glutamate. Again, glutamate dehydrogenase again acts on glutamate, turning into alpha ketoglutamate. Okay, here you can see the glutamine being converted to glutamate. Okay, This is the glutaminase. This glutamate dehydrogenase being converting it to alpha ketoglutarate. This process actually generates two ammonium molecules. You can just see two ammonium molecules. Can you see? Okay, this and this alpha ketoglutarate will enters the PCA cycle and gets metabolized to one bicarb. Fine. This so two ammonium, and along with ammonium you'll get two bicarb also, because this ammonium combines with H plus. For every H plus that is being secreted, you get a bicarb. So totally you get three bicarb, two ammonium molecules. Three bicarb, two ammonium after glutamin metabolism. So metabolism of glutamin needs two ammonium and three bicarb. So the ammonium hence generated splits up to ammonia and H plus, and H plus finds its own way out through H plus ATPase or sodium H plus antiporter, or ammonium as such will enter the He3 instead of H plus and comes out to the tubular lumen. Then what happens to the ammonium? It actually travels to the lumen. Slowly it enters the medullary thick ascending limb. Here you know the sodium potassium 2-chloride channel through which ammonium enters the interstitium. So the ammonium in medullary interstitium is very important because it actually helps in concentrating the urine. Along with that, this ammonium is being transported by a rhesus protein called RHCG into the cortical and medullary collecting ducts. Fine. That is how ammonium is being sent to the distal part of the nephron. Here the ammonium combines with the H plus that is being generated. Okay. Here, you can just see this is the ammonium that is entering the distal part of the lumen. You can see the ammonium that is being a H plus that is being secreted, which combines to form the ammonia. This is how it works. Okay. Now we'll go on to the renal tubular acidosis proper. Okay. We'll start with proximal RTA. Okay. So proximal RTA, distal RTA, type 3, or you have combined type 1 and type 2 basically because there is carbonic anhydrase 2 deficiency, and you have a type 4 hyperkalemic RTA. So now you can tell me what are the defects, what are the channels which are involved, which can be probably involved in proximal tubular RTA, CRTA, I mean. One channel probably is sodium H plus antiporter, very good. Another channel, H plus ATPase. Third channel, okay, basolateral membrane, or it can be the carbonic anhydrase. Very good. If you want to listen, okay, this is the same thing. So either it can present as a single disorder, one channel problem, or it can be a pan problem. So proximal tubule, other than handling acid, it handles so many other proteins, I mean, so many other molecules. Like I'll show you, phosphate. It handles glucose, amino acid, other organic solutes. It handles uric acid. So many other solutes are also being handled by proximal convoluted tubule. So it can be a pan problem of the proximal convoluted tubule. So it appears as Fanconi syndrome, or it can be an isolated defect. How can you classify proximal RTA? It can be primary or secondary RTA. So basically, it can be hereditary, like dominant, recessive. Recessive is seen with sodium bicarbonate cotransporter, usually associated with mental retardation, ocular abnormalities. Or it can be sporadic, where it is because of immaturity of NHE3. Okay. I'm not going to detail of this. It's basically inherited forms of PRTA, usually associated with Fanconi syndrome. Okay, it is X-linked or autosomal recessive. Okay. So there are innumerable causes of proximal RTA. we actually commonly see in adults, basically we see with multiple myeloma, okay, Wilson's disease. Probably in pediatrics, you might be seeing fructose intolerance, cystinosis, etc., galactosemia. And other forms of secondary RTA, which we, secondary proximal RTA, what we see is vitamin D deficiency and hyperparathyroidism. We usually see this hyperparathyroidism adenoma, parathyroid adenoma can actually present as proximal RTA, amyloidosis. Okay. Then drugs, common drugs which I've highlighted is aminoglycoside, valproate, acetazolamide, and there are so many causes of acquired RTA. Basically, it's paraproteinemias and toxins, cadmium, lead, etc., autoimmune diseases, okay, and drugs. What is the usual presentation of proximal RTA? It can be asymptomatic, or in children, it might present as stunted growth or osteomalacia, rickets, etc. Or patient can present with Fanconi syndrome complications, hypophosphatemia. Okay, and usually, if you ask me like whether proximal tubular RTA or distal, that is type 1 RTA or type 2 RTA, which has got severe acidosis? Which one do you feel like? Type 1. If so, why? Because the distal part of the nephron is intact. Distal part of the nephron being intact, it has the capacity to generate large amount of, excrete large amount of ammonia. So it can compensate to one extent, some extent for the acidosis due to decreased reabsorption of bicarb. So the amount of acidosis might be milder in proximal RTA. Okay. But after a point, like if you say usually the bicarb levels in proximal RTA will be somewhere around 16 and 18. So if you try to increase the bicarbonate level by giving the patient alkali, immediately the patient starts developing bicarbonaturemia. Okay. So in proximal RTA, you have hypochloremic metabolic acidosis or normal anion gut metabolic acidosis along with hypokalemia, and pH will be variable. When bicarb, serum bicarb level is somewhere around 16, 18, okay, and distal, the tubules are intact, proximal RTA, the pH will come below 5.3. Okay, because distal acidification is the thing that brings down the pH of urine. Distal acidification is intact. So bicarbonate level of 16, 18 doesn't matter. Distal tubules will handle the H plus excretion. But once you start giving bicarbonate, the bicarbonate will be lost through urine. Okay, right? This will actually increase the urine pH. That is the reason why pH is variable in proximal RTA. Can you get me? Boring. No? Okay. Like diagnosis of RTA, proximal, if you are in doubt, so you're not sure whether you're actually dealing with a proximal RTA or not, then you have to actually give ammonium chloride. Okay, ammonium chloride is being given in the 0.1 gram per kg. It is being filled inside the amoxicillin capsules for the child to swallow, or you can just put a rice tube and give it. Okay, that's how we usually give. And hourly urine pH, and at the final endpoint, you measure the serum bicarbonate levels also. You do a BBG, or you can actually give, if that is not possible, just give 1 to 2 milliequivalents of bicarbonate per kg per day and see whether the bicarbonate levels are adequately achieved. If it is proximal RTA, you won't be able to achieve, because whatever bicarbonate you give, it will be lost through urine. So in that case, you can approximately say you are actually dealing with the proximal RTA. So treatment of proximal RTA requires high doses of alkali. Actually, bicarb levels of 10 to 15 milliequivalents. Although the acidosis is small, the amount of bicarbonate you give is a bit high. Because of 10 to 15 milliequivalents per kg per day you require, along with potassium supplementation. You just give bicarbonate, the patient is going to become hypokalemic. Okay. Along with, you have to give hydrochlorothiazide also. But see to it that the patient doesn't develop hypokalemia. So with that, we'll come to distal RTA. Distal RTA is failure of H plus secretion in the distal tubule decreased titrable acid, decreased ammonia formation. Okay, and you won't be able to bring the pH below 5.3. Okay, in spite of severe acidemia. That is a problem with the distal tubule. Okay, so it's a normal anion gap metabolic acidosis with a decreased serum bicarbonate concentration. In spite of acidemia, you can't bring the pH below 5.3. Right? So, just as in proximal tubule, we have various channels. What are the abnormal channels in distal tubule? Can you recall? Anyone? Okay, H plus K plus ATPase. Next, H plus ATPase. Chloride shunt problem. Next, one more important. ENaC abnormality. Good. One more. What is there in the basolateral side of the membrane? There's an anion exchanger, AE1. Okay, which shunts bicarbonate to the bloodstream and chloride into the cytosol. One unique feature of distal RTA is hypocitraturia. Proximal RTA, citrate is being lost in urine. Okay, but in distal RTA, you have hypocitraturia. Why? Proximal part of the nephron is intact. There is acidosis in the system. So acidosis actually increases reabsorption of citrate. I told you in the previous slides. So there is hypocitraturia, and because of this decreased citrate excretion in the urine, as contrasted to proximal RTA, distal RTA, there is increased stone formation. Okay. So just like proximal RTA, it can be hereditary or acquired, and it can be autosomal dominant, recessive. It can be associated with deafness. It can be without deafness. Okay. It can be distal, incomplete distal RTA, or it can be transient. So the genetic disorders, the important ones you would like to know is congenital adrenal hyperplasia, sickle cell anemia, hereditary fructose intolerance, hyperoxaluria type 1. Okay, others, calcium disorders and dysproteinomic syndromes. These are the syndromes which we commonly see in adult dysproteinemic syndromes, and autoimmune diseases. In lupus patients also we see these things, and Sjogren's, especially Sjogren's, rheumatoid arthritis, primary biliary cirrhosis, and Medullary sponge kidney (MSK), and reflex nephropathy. All these are usual causes of secondary distal RTA, and numerous list of drugs and toxins. Okay, zoledronic acid is one of the culprit. So what is the usual clinical picture and presentation of these patients? These symptoms basically will be related to hypokalemia. Okay, in older child, polydipsia and polyuria will be present, and there will be growth impairment. In younger children, it is basically failure to thrive, and there will be progression of the disease. Distal RTA actually causes nephrocalcinosis, and it is a progressive disease and can lead to CKD if not treated at time. So, what are the clues you should get? Normal anion gap metabolic acidosis. In spite of acidemia, you have a urine pH of more than 5.3 and associated hypokalemia. Okay, this will be the clue for you to investigate further. We know that urine ammonium excretion is abnormal in distal RTA. How are you going to measure that? Is it possible to measure ammonia? No. Actually, there is no quantitative assessment of ammonia. Whatever we have is a qualitative assessment. It is basically done by urine anion gap and urine osmolar gap. What are these things? Just like serum anion gap. In serum, what you do? You take a sum of sodium plus potassium minus chloride plus bicarbonate. The same thing you apply in urine. Bicarbonate is 0. Usually you don't get bicarbonate urea unless there's a proximal tubular dysfunction or your post-alkaline diuresis is being taking place. So in normal conditions, you don't get bicarbonate in urine. So sodium plus potassium in urine minus chloride. And usually the ammonia, what we cannot measure that is NH4 plus, that is the unmeasured cation, will be the urine anion gap. Can you get me? Right? Urine anion gap indicates the unmeasured anion. In healthy subjects, it's usually 0 because apart from chloride, there are other unmeasured cations like sulfates, etc., phosphates. So there are so many other unmeasured cations. So usually the gap is 0, or in normal condition, it might be plus 10, nothing more than 10. But urine anion gap 0 or negative, that is unmeasured cations are very high. Okay, that is basically because of ammonia. In the presence of systemic acidosis, you have a negative urine anion gap. What does that mean? You have increased amount of production of ammonia in the presence of some acidosis, normal anion gap acidosis. What could that be? Can you guess? Kidneys are normal. It's being able to produce large amount of ammonia, but patient has got acidosis. What could that be? That is starting it over. What happens in diarrhea? What happens in diarrhea? Bicarbonate is being lost through fecal matter. So what happens? You need increased regeneration of bicarb. So what does kidney do? Kidney actually forces H plus to be secreted into the ammonia. Okay, so there will be increase in ammonia production. So in a normal anion gap metabolic acidosis with a negative urine anion gap, which means there is increased ammonia production, is basically because of diarrhea. There is a GI loss of bicarbonate. But what happens in distal RTA? You are not able to secrete H plus to the ammonia. So what happens? There is decrease in net acid excretion and urine pH is high. In spite of acidemia, urine anion gap can be positive. Okay? You're clear with the concept of urine anion gap? No. Yes. No. Okay. It's basically urine sodium plus potassium. Just like serum sodium plus potassium minus chloride. Okay. So unmeasured cation will be ammonium, NH4 plus. Okay. Unmeasured cation will be NH4 plus, which we can't measure. So there will always be a gap. Usually unmeasured, there will be no gap. Gap is, okay, there is actually no gap. Unmeasured cation is the gap. The unmeasured cation is ammonia. Okay. So usually in healthy subject, there's no gap or 0. Because there will be so many other unmeasured cations also, etc. Usually the sodium plus potassium minus chloride is usually 0 or 10. Okay. In the presence of acidosis, normal anion gap metabolic acidosis, okay, due to diarrhea, what will be the serum urine anion gap? Urine anion gap will be negative because unmeasured ammonia will increase. And saliva. Yeah. Okay. See, normally there is no gap. Sodium plus potassium plus so many cations minus chloride plus bicarbonate and so many anions. Usually there is no gap. If you can measure each and every cation and you can actually measure each and every anion and you can actually write the equation, there will be no gap. The gap will be 0. But you have ammonia here which you can't measure. So when you write the equation, okay, left side will be less than the right side. Okay, so what will be the net result? We will get a negative value. Negative value. The negative value, what you get is ammonia. Can you get me? Okay, that is urine anion gap. Okay, so that is the reason why you have a negative urine anion gap during diarrhea. Fine. So if it is a positive urine anion gap, that is sodium plus potassium is more than the chloride, in spite of acidosis. What does that mean? Kidney is not responding, it is not secreting enough ammonia. Okay. So, but this urine anion gap has got its own problems. I'm not going into details of that. Okay. And there is one more gap, osmolar gap. Okay. How do you calculate serum osmolarity? Anyone? Okay, the same thing, but you are applying it urine. Okay, that's how you actually calculate the urine osmolarity. You can calculate the osmolarity plus you can measure the osmolarity. How can you measure the osmolarity of urine? Lab. Okay. What do we do in the lab? What is the most ideal measure for urine osmolarity? Whereas depression freezing point is the best method. There are other methods also. But you can actually measure urine osmolarity by using those methods, and you can calculate urine osmolarity by our normal bedside method. So this will be different. Why? Yeah, you don't measure ammonium. So the unmeasured ammonium is there in our calculated value. So there is a gap. Again, there is a gap. That is measured your osmolarity minus calculated osmolarity, there will be a gap, which indicates that gap indicates ammonium. Okay. So normal urine osmolar gap is 80 to 150 milliequivalents per liter. So that is what we consider as ammonia excretion. This gap increases during diarrhea, and this gap is literally absent during complete distal RTA. Got it? So So high urine osmolar gap of more than 300 to 400 is seen in normal anion gap metabolic acidosis due to diarrhea. Fine. If there is no gap, it means distal tubules are not functioning. Okay. So this is the approach to normal anion gap metabolic acidosis. If there's a normal anion gap metabolic acidosis, check for urine anion gap. No gap, check for urine gap. Okay. If there is a gap in urine, probably it is a systemic problem and kidneys are normally functioning. If urine anion gap is absent, probably distal tubules are not functioning properly. But if the proximal tubules are functioning, will you get the gap? Yes. Proximal tubules, for example, I'll show you the next slide. In proximal RTA, what happens? Distal tubules are functioning. So there will be ammonium excretion in response to acidosis. So there will be a urine anion gap in proximal RTA. You can have not a normal urine anion gap, you will have some meaningful gap in proximal RTA. But yeah. So studies of distal RTA show that urine pH is high, hypokalemia is present, you have hypochloremic metabolic acidosis, you have patients with low urine ammonium excretion. It is measured by urine anion gap or urine osmolar gap. Okay. What is incomplete distal RTA? Have you seen this? This is most common thing which we encounter in adults and even children. Okay, you see a child with nephrocalcinosis, you're not sure. If you just take the VBG, it will be normal. Okay, but you try to just see the urine pH, there won't be any abnormality at that point of time. But once you give ammonium chloride, once you put the patient on ammonium chloride loading test, when given a challenge, these patients won't be able to excrete acid. Okay, so it should be considered in cases with idiopathic renal calculi with alkaline urine. So it's usually seen in Sjogren's, post-urethral valve disease, amphotericin toxicity. There is one more thing that is coming up is urine carbon dioxide. Okay, why urine carbon dioxide? Okay, what happens in alkaline diuresis? Normally, there will be a lot of bicarbonate reaching the distal end of the tubule. Okay, lot of bicarbonate will reach the distal end of the tubule. What happens if lot of HCO3 ions reach the distal part of the tubule? Electronegativity of the lumen increases. Okay, and there is increased activity of H plus ATPase. Okay, so this H plus ATPase combines with the bicarbonate in the lumen, and this bicarbonate splits up to carbonic acid and H2 and CO2, and that's why there is increased amount of CO2 in urine during alkaline diuresis. Okay. So in healthy individuals, we just check the urine PCO2. The levels might rise up to 70. Urine minus blood is more sensitive, and that should go beyond 20 in healthy subjects in forced alkaline diuresis. Okay. So, but this will be defective in patients with distal secretory H plus problems, because there is no H plus to combine with the bicarbonate that is there in the lumen. So what happens? There will be no carbon dioxide formation. So it fails to rise beyond 55, and urine minus blood PCO2 will be less than 20. What is the treatment of distal alkali? You don't require large amount of alkali here. Adults usually requires 1 to 2 milliequivalents per kg per day, whereas in children require a little more higher doses because they bicarb is essential for their normal growth. Along with that, the patient should be supplemented with potassium. So usually it is being given as a potassium bicarbonate or a potassium citrate, because citrate is again less in distal alkali. This is the pathogenesis. Clinical features: normal, inability to lower the urine pH. Initial phase there will be high urine ammonia initially. Okay, later what happens is that there will be nephrocalcinosis, decrease in citrate. Finally, the patient leads to citrate as discussed. Okay, I'm just showing the previous slide once again, basically because you might have forgotten. Here you can see the ENaC channel. Don't forget the Barton channel or the chloride channel. Okay, and you have the thiazide sensitive sodium chloride co-transporter in the distal cannulated tubule. Just remember all these channels because we are going to important part. Important part is hyperkalemic distal RPE. What is the mechanism of hypokalemia in these patients? Have you ever bothered? We never discussed much of hypokalemia. Why should there be hypokalemia in proximal and distal RPE? Why? Yeah, because you cannot secrete H plus and the lumen is electronegative. Lumen is electronegative and you are unable to secrete H plus into the lumen. Lumen being increasingly electronegative, it actually pulls out the potassium out from the cell. Okay, that is one of the reasons. And basically, there is decreased sodium absorption, there's decreased extracellular fluid volume, increased aldosterone stimulation, renin-angiotensin aldosterone axis, and that is one of the reasons for hypokalemia. I'm not going to detail. So, and there is hypercalciuria also in these patients. Why is calcium increasingly secreted out? Any idea? It's basically because of the acidosis part. Okay, acidosis. This acidosis starts demineralization of the bone, and there is increase in serum calcium, and finally hypercalciuria and stone formation. Hypocitraturia, hypercalciuria, all favors stone formation. Okay, now let's go to the last type, and this is the most confusing type of RTA. That is a hyperkalemic or type 4 RTA. Okay, just like other RTAs, you have the primary and the secondary type. Okay, primary type, it's early childhood, can be transient, or it can be due to secondary. It's basically the mineralocorticoid deficiency. I told you the importance of aldosterone in maintaining a normal acid-base balance. So, mineralocorticoid deficiency, where do you see this? Congenital adrenal hyperplasia. You can see in isolated hypoaldosteronism or Addison's disease. Okay, all these causes mineralocorticoid deficiency, or it can be decreased renin, because the renin is a stimulator for aldosterone release. So that can be decreased renin. It can be seen in chronic nephropathy, diabetic nephropathy. This is what we commonly see in adults. Whenever you start a diabetic patient on ARB, immediately patient develops hypokalemia. Basically because patient's renin levels are low. Okay, and this leads to aldosterone decrease. And there is hyporenemic hypoaldosterone. This is very important for you, which is seen in glomerulonephritis, acute glomerulonephritis, especially post-streptococcal, which you usually commonly see. That's the case finally. Okay, there are other genetic disorders like type 1 pseudo hypoaldosteronism or aldosterone resistance, where mineralocorticoid receptors are fault, and you have type 2, where the ENaC channel is hyperactive. Even without aldosterone, ENaC channels keeps to be hyperactive. Or the chloride channel, which I showed you, is hyperactive. Okay, anything which causes increase in extracellular fluid volume, decrease in aldosterone, but okay. Gordon syndrome, and you have chronic nephropathies, obstructive neuropathy, drugs, AIDS nephropathy, etc. So basically, there is impaired renin-angiotensin system by the COX. The NSAIDs are another important factors. NSAIDs impair RAA axis, and it also decreases aldosterone production and release. Okay, then you have the potassium-sparing diuretics and altered K plus distribution because of insulin, beta adrenergic antagonist, alpha adrenergic agonist. All these things causes shifts, rapid shifts of potassium in and out of the cell. Okay, as I told you, the blood pH and PCO2 are important factors in distal urinary acidification, along with the sodium transport causing the transepithelial potential difference. That is the ENaC channel being hyperactive, causing electronegativity in the lumen. Okay, so this is the role of, so aldosterone plays a very important role in acidification of urine and very important role in potassium secretion inside the lumen. Okay. Just as I told you, the sodium transport in DCT and CCD creates a lumen electronegative potential difference, which favors H plus and K plus secretion and activates ENaC channel, and along with sodium potassium ATPase in the basolateral side. Okay, it also activates the H plus ATPase activity. All these put together causes increased sodium absorption, increased H plus secretion, and increased potassium secretion, and increased ammonia genesis, both directly and indirectly. It causes hypokalemia, and hence it causes increase in ammonia genesis in phospholipid liver. So finally, if this important hormone is being knocked off, either because of production, release, or hyporenemia, or because of mineralocorticoid receptor resistance, or because of pseudo hypoaldosteronism, everything can cause type 4 heart failure. So this is what happens: impaired renin release, NSAID, beta blockers, cyclosporin, tacrolimus, diabetes in elderly. There is impaired renin release from the juxtaglomerular apparatus, or these are direct renin inhibitors, aliskiren, etc. This can also cause RTA. This is angiotensin convert renin to angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2, where you can use the AC inhibitors and lateral, etc., which can also cause hypokalemia and RTA. And you can see the angiotensin receptor blockers, okay, like spironolactone, okay, eplerenone, etc., where you can see the aldosterone receptor blockers here, okay, or you can see the ENaC blockers, amloride, trimethoprim, pentamidine, etc., blocks the ENaC channel, and there is impaired aldosterone metabolism because of heparin, ketoconazole, Addison's disease, etc. So this is a nutshell regarding type 4 RP. Okay, now what to do? Approach a patient with negative urine anion gap. This is what I told you earlier. Urine anion gap is negative. What does that mean? Ammonia production is intact. It can be a systemic acidosis with kidneys being normal, diarrhea, or it could be proximal RTA. In that case, you should look for pH, urine pH. But it's in a proximal RTA. Okay, load the patient with soda bicarb or give alkaline diuresis for that patient. What happens? Urine minus blood PCO2 increases. That means the distal secretory capacity of H plus is intact and urine minus blood PCO2 increases. And when you load the patient with bicarb in proximal RTA, there's a decreased reabsorption. More than 10 to 15% of bicarb will be lost through urine. That will be bicarbonate urine. So you can actually diagnose proximal RTA, or you can actually diagnose diarrhea or something else. Okay. What happens if urine anion gap is positive? Then the approach is, you should see whether the patient is having hypokalemia or patient is having hyperkalemia. If the patient is having hypokalemia, high urine pH, the probability is distal RTA. Hyperkalemia with variable pH, probably you are dealing with hyperkalemic RTA, type 4. Okay. So if that is the case, again give soda bicarb loading test. Your PCO2 will be less. Your urine anion gap will be positive. Urine osmolar gap will be less. Okay. All this will tell you it's a distal RTA. Okay. Or it is a type 4 RTA. The next is, you can use this transtubular potassium gradient. Here, TT, normally the luminal potassium is more than the serum potassium. Normally, whatever we excrete has to be secreted actively to the lumen. Potassium has to be excreted. So normally the TTKG value, that is potassium in urine minus divided by, you know this, no? TTKG. Okay, like potassium urine by potassium plasma. Potassium urine will be definitely more, and it is almost more than 4 when divided by the osmolarity of urine to plasma. Okay, but in hyperkalemic patient, if this TTKG is less than 8, transtubular potassium gradient is less than 8, that is, the urine potassium is less. That's what it indicates. This indicates that collecting duct is not properly secreting potassium. In the presence of hyperkalemia, there should be excess of potassium secretion. Instead, the transtubular gradient of potassium is 8. That means there is a secretory defect in potassium. It might be because of aldosterone resistance, release, action defect, or pseudo-hypoaldosteronism. Okay. So what to do with hyperkalemic RTA? So the goal of treatment is normalize serum concentration, because normalization of serum concentration itself will decrease acidosis, because hyperkalemia will impair ammoniogenesis. Okay. So first, serum concentration of potassium should be normalized as early as possible. Okay. And long-term treatment is, each and everything should be taken care of. Diet, drugs, okay, hyperglycemia, volume depletion, everything has to be taken care of. Use of loop diuretics and mineralocorticoid agonist, like basically fludrocortisone, drugs like that should be used for potassium binders. So this is in a nutshell all the 3 RTAs. I haven't discussed the type 3 RTA here, because it has got both features of proximal and distal RTA because of carbonic anhydrase deficiency. Okay, so here you can see what will be the plasma potassium normally in proximal and distal RTA. Hypokalemia. Distal, it will be high. What will be the urine anion gap in proximal? It can be negative. Distal ammonia secretion into the lumen is normal, so it can be negative. Okay, it will be positive in distal RTAs. Urine pH, you know the difference. In this proximal, it can go below 5.5 provided bicarb is definitely low. But in distal, it is more than 5.5. Ammonia excretion is decreased in distal and hyperkalemic RTA. Fractional excretion of potassium is abnormal in hyperkalemic RTA. Calcium excretion is usually increased in distal RTA because the level of acidosis is very high and leads to demineralization of the bone. Okay, citrate excretion is decreased in distal RTA. Okay, now you no need to mug up the whole thing. Okay, now we are able to do it without a doubt. Okay, now you know the fractional excretion is of proximal RTA is more than 10 to 15%. It's less than 5% in distal RTA. Okay, when you give bicarbonate gets lost because it cannot absorb proximal RTA. Okay, but not so in distal. And you know the PCO2, urine minus blood PCO2 is normal or more than 20 in proximal, less than 20 in distal, and more than 20 in hyperkalemic also. Okay, if you treat the hyperkalemia, you can still excrete H+. Okay, other tubular defects are present in proximal RTA, probably Fanconi. Nephrocalcinosis is more in distal RTA. Okay. Okay, with this we'll go to the case. Okay, this is the first case. A 3.5-year-old girl presents with progressive loss of gross motor milestones over a period of 6 months and presents to you with an acute flaccid paralysis. Physical examination reveals proximal myopathy, diminished lower limb reflexes, and muscle tone. Okay, now you have a potassium of 2.1. What will you do? What is the next step? Okay, look for the other anions. Other electrolytes. Sodium is 130, chloride is 113. It's hyperchloremia. Our anion gap is just 8. Okay, you can see the ABG 7.3 is the pH. Patient has got acidosis. Bicarb is 19, and urine pH is 6.5. What would it be? Distal RTA. Good, distal RTA. So ultrasound revealed bilateral nephrocalcinosis. Serum creatinine was normal. Urine calcium creatinine ratio was high. Okay, and tubular reabsorption phosphate. That is, phosphate absorption was normal because proximal tubular abnormality is absent, and phosphate is being basically handled by the proximal tubule. And urine was negative for any reducing substance. Okay, what will be the urine anion gap in this patient? Positive. Good. What will be the urine osmolar gap? There will be urine osmolar gap will be less. Okay, then okay. Because there is no ammonia. And so just remember, like common presentations of RTA is not hypokalemia in children, although it is so in adults. It is usually failure to thrive, nephrolithiasis, renal rickets, polyuria, constipation, and life-threatening acidosis with even a mild diarrhea or any small infection. This is how they present to you. And this is case 2, where you have a 9-month-old baby. Okay, he was noticed to have broadening of the breast and ankles. His urine pH was 6. Okay, and serum ABG potassium was 3.6. Bicarb was 21. The serum anion, urine anion gap was normal. Okay, what further tests you would like to do? Okay, you can check for the urine pH after ammonium chloride loading test can be done, because we are not sure. pH is 6, bicarb is somewhere around 21 is less. We don't know whether it's proximal RTA or distal RTA. Okay, although the patient has got broadening of the wrist and ankles. So the further test is basically urine pH. Okay, urine pH after ammonium chloride loading test. And if that is, what do you expect? In distal RTA, if you give ammonium chloride, even then the pH is not going to come down. In proximal RTA, if you give ammonium chloride, the pH is going to come down. Okay, then you can do a alkali therapy and check for PCO2, urine PCO2, urine minus blood PCO2 should be more than 20 in proximal RTA, but will be less than 20 in distal RTA. So finally, this patient, on evaluation of others, like he had Fanconi, he had hypophosphatemia, hyperuricemia, glycosuria, and amino aciduria. So finally, we came to a diagnosis of proximal RTA. So this is case 3. This was the case which you presented last year. Actually, she was a 12-year-old girl who was admitted with post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis and renal failure. On day 8, patient became clinically better. Actually, edema subsided, serum creatinine normalized, but persistently her serum potassium was 6. and pH was 7.32 and bicarb was 21. So, and the anion gap and serum anion gap was normal. Urine pH was 6. Potassium could not be normalized in spite of anti-hyperkalemic measures. For 2 days, we were actually giving dextrose, insulin, K-bind, everything was given, but even and in spite of alkali therapy, we couldn't actually normalize our potassium levels. Finally, fluorocortisone was added. Okay, it normalized, which actually normalized serum potassium and acidosis was normalized. Okay, and this is basically because of the hyporeninemic, hypoaldosteronism, and glomerular nephritis. Okay, this is one of the common conditions you are likely to see. This is case 4. This is a very interesting case actually. It was a 12-day-old male baby was admitted with increased lethargy. On examination, he was severely dehydrated. There was no obvious GI loss. Lab showed like serum potassium was 10, sodium was 114, pH was 7.23. So neonatal salt basin syndrome was diagnosed with hypokalemia and with acidosis. So it's a type 4 RPA, straightforward case. But as usual in other patients, we gave fluids to correct the hypovolemia, gave soda bicarbonate infusion along with fluorocortisone. We gave mineralocorticoid also. But even then, there was no improvement. Suspected, we gave fluorocortisone basically because suspected congenital adrenal hyperplasia. Even then, potassium could not be normalized. So further labs, so were checked. We actually checked for aldosterone levels, and it was found to be very high. Okay, and so there is some problem with aldosterone working, either mineralocorticoid level, okay, or there's a problem with the ENaC channel. We don't know. So sodium, urinary sodium was more than 38, and urinary potassium was less than 0.7. So if you check TTKG in this patient, it will be less than 8. So finally, it was an aldosterone resistance. There's a pseudo hypoaldosteronism, type 1. Okay, it is due to loss of function mutation of mineralocorticoid receptor. Okay, there are actually two clinically distinct entities, which is one is related to renal alone, and the other has got multiple target organs because aldosterone mineralocorticoid receptors are also present in other organs. You should know what is type 2 also. This is Gordon syndrome, where I told you that channel, no, the chloride channel, there is increased chloride reabsorption. And there is increased chloride reabsorption, and there is consequent hyperkalemia, metabolic acidosis, and low renal arterial hypertension. Okay. You know that anion exchanger, below that you had a chloride channel. That chloride channel becomes hyperfunctioning. Finally, this anion exchanger can't work, which finally leads to acidosis and hyperkalemia. Congenital adrenal hyperplasia, the levels will be low. So that is the reason why fluorocortisone was started. But here, the amount of aldosterone produced is not, in fact, high. It is actually, the adrenal gland is normally responding to the hyperkalemia and metabolic acidosis. Yeah, before that it can be both. That is the reason why fluorocortisone, bicarb infusion, and IV fluids along with potassium lowering therapy was given. But the baby was not responding to any of these. So, and only after that we check the aldosterone levels. Why it is not happening? So when we check the aldosterone levels are high. So then we thought of aldosterone functioning problem. So then this was the reason finally. Type 1 and type 2. In type 2, it is low renin. Okay. Here, even the renin will be stimulated. Okay. Type 1, it is a hypovolemic situation. Okay. But whereas type 2, there is expansion of extracellular fluid volume. So there will be hypertension and low renin. That is how you differentiate 1 and 2. Okay. So this is a case 4. This is about the case 4. So the baby had urinary salt wasting, dehydration, metabolic derangements, normal blood pressure, preserved GFR, elevated aldosterone, high PRI, high plasma renin activity, and hence it is pseudohypoaldosteronism type 1. Okay. Now this is the last case. This is actually an adult female. She presented to neurology with, I mean, 6 months back we had this patient. She presented to neurology. Okay. She had progressive weakness of her upper limb and lower limb for 2 days, followed by weakness of right half and asymmetrical flaccid quadriparesis. Okay. There was no sensory or cranial nerve involvement. No bladder, no bowel, no autonomic signs or symptoms. Okay. The lab showed severe hypokalemia. Potassium was 2.4 and pH was 7.3. Okay. Bicarb levels were 15. And she had normal anion gap. She had hyperchloremia. 118 was the chloride. But to our surprise, actually, we initially thought of distal RPA. But when checked phosphorus, uric acid, calcium, you can see the phosphorus is just 1.6. Okay, uric acid is 1.3. Okay, so and urine pH was 8. And urine potassium was 9.1. In spite of hypokalemia, the urine potassium was 9.1. And urine calcium excretion was high. Uric acid excretion was high, phosphate was high, and citrate was also, citrate was normal in fact. So, like, it was basically a normal anion gap metabolic acidosis with hypocalcemia, calciuresis, hypouricemia, uricosuriia, hypophosphatemia and phosphaturia, and severe hypokalemia and kaliuresis, and normal citrate urea, and 24 aminogram sure amino acid urea. So with this, we can say the patient is having proximal RPA. Okay, and when the retrospective history was like she had dryness of mouth and eyes for past few months, and Schimmel's test which we did was positive, and ANA was positive, and ANA profile showed anti-Ro antibody, and lip biopsy showed focal adenitis, and finally Sjogren's syndrome was diagnosed, and Sjogren-induced tubular interstitial nephritis was diagnosed. And I think with this, I'm taking. Thank you for your patient listening, because it was such a boring topic.
Dr. Janina, for the detailed presentation. I'm sure the PGs would have definitely benefited with this. Now it's time for questions. Any of the PGs are asking any questions, you can please repeat it so for the benefit of those on the Zoom also.
Very, very, very complicated actually. Initially, to tell you the truth, whenever I read this during my UG MD days, finally what I do was like mugging up the whole thing. Urine anion gap, urine osmolar gap, positive, negative, positive, negative. Okay. Finally, I never understood the full pathology and pathogenesis. Still, I did my DA. Okay, only after that I understood. That is the reason why I wanted to take this complex. Basically, it is very simple. If you ask me in a very simple version, if you ask me, it's like proximal tubule, bicarbonate, reclamation. The whole bicarbonate can be, whatever is being filtered, it is being reabsorbed. That is done in proximal tubule. Proximal tubule generates ammonia, but it has no capacity to excrete. Excretion of ammonia takes place only in the distal tubule. So, basic is proximal tubule is for bicarbonate reabsorption, and for generation, it is distal tubule. That's all. This much you can understand. This ammonia is needed, and you need a titrable acid. This is basically because you need a titrable acid for urinary buffer. Okay. Now, distal tubular problem, you have to check for ammonia excretion. Ammonia can be checked by urine osmolar gap and urine anion gap. Proximal tubular dysfunction, either it might be a generalized dysfunction, or you have to do a sodium chloride loading test and see to it that urine acidifies properly. So the fine tuning is by the distal and gross is by the proximal. So this is how it goes. It is very simple actually, but to understand it's a bit complicated.
What is the basic, the child with the common presentation we see is a child with failure with right.
Okay.
So we wanted to roll out RTA as one of the possibilities. So as a basic level investigation, see the VBG or ABG.
You first check the serum electrolytes. First check the serum electrolytes. Serum electrolytes, just check the VBG. If the child is having acidosis, check whether the patient is having a normal anion gap acidosis or hyperchloremic acidosis. If there is no GI loss, okay, probably it's a renal loss. If it is a renal loss, oh, okay, check the urine pH first. In the presence of acidemia, what is the urine pH? Say, for example, urine pH is more than 6.5 in the presence of acidemia, but you don't know whether there is bicarbonate in urine, which can also increase the urine pH. Okay, or you don't know whether the distal tubules are not functioning. So because H plus is not being secreted, that is the reason why pH is high. So you don't know. So this is the situation. So in this situation, you can do a urine anion gap. Okay, urine anion gap. If you can do a urine anion gap, which shows it is a positive urine anion gap. The urine anion gap is more than 20. In that case, problem is with the distal tubules, it is not being able to excrete ammonia. Okay. And next other problem is you can check for urine osmolar gap. Most of the labs don't do urine osmolarity. That is the reason why I'm not stressing much on it. Urine osmolar gap is also a very good indicator on urine ammonia excretion. Okay, leave it. You don't have facility for doing any of these. Okay. Normal anion gap metabolic acidosis, urine pH more than 6.5. Okay, in that case, do one thing, do ammonium chloride loading test. Do an ammonium, that is very simple actually. It's available in our lab. We had actually done 6 months back to a child with rickets. So it's very easy. The child can solve it with the juice, or you can give it as, in very small babies, you can actually give it as RP. Then check for serial urine pH. Okay, if the patient has got not, say for example, bicarbonate is somewhere around 20, 22 or 18 to 22, you can attempt all this. If the bicarb levels are less than 18, say some 15, 10, 12, don't attempt for a ammonium chloride loading test. If you're this way, that way with the diagnosis, you can attempt with ammonium chloride loading test. If the patient is in severe acidosis and urine pH is more than 6.5, you can definitely go ahead with the diagnosis of distal RTA, provided the patient's potassium is hypokalemia. Okay. Serial hourly till maximum concentration, till the bicarb levels falls to adequate, say 16 or 15 millimoles per liter is the serum bicarbonate. Even then the urine pH is say somewhere around 6.5, you can definitely say distal tubules are not functioning. Ideal is to do a urine anion gap, do a urine osmolar gap, then find the ammonia amount. But in a setting, if we are sitting in a peripheral setup, we don't have any other way. We have a this way, that way acidosis, say somewhere around 20, 19 is the serum bicarbonate level. Okay, you want to say this is some RTA. You don't have any other facility. So the simplest and the cheapest thing is ammonium chloride loading test. Okay. That is a simple way. Most easiest way. The basic confusion comes that basically is proximal tubule is generating this ammonia, but it reaches a distal tubule to be secreted. That is where the whole confusion comes, whether it is distal, whether it is proximal. Okay. Forget about the proximal tubule. Ammonia is, although produced in the proximal tubule, is handled completely by the distal tubule. Okay. So ammonia means distal tubule. Whenever you are in, say for example, crisis, infection, or you are in need of more bicarb, okay, that's the reason why I told you, even if a mild infection, okay, patient might present with severe acidosis. That is the usual presentation in unit lyceum. Yeah, sepsis.
We have the situation. and that's severe acidosis.
Severe acidosis.
So is the differentiation if the anion gap is high, then can you reliably say, or you have to repeat it again at a certain point when the child is compensated, when initially compensated? Like for example, child is in severe metabolic acidosis. Sepsis in monoarousal metabolism or RPA.
True.
Then you look at anion gap. Anion gap is raised, then you can go for this other two, like either sepsis or
sepsis,
monoarousal
decay,
metabolism,
decay, etc.
So if anion gap is normal, is that the time when we have to start looking for RPA or
it is definitely, I mean, in the presence of a high anion gap metabolic acidosis, we can say for sure you have a RTA. You might be having a combined problem. You can have, that is the reason why if you have two acidosis, for example, if you have DKA and you have RTA, for example, in that case, you should do another value is delta bicarb to delta anion gap. Okay, if delta bicarb is less than delta anion gap, that means there is one more acidosis along with this. For example, if say anion gap is say something like 20, what is the normal bicarb you expect in blood? You might expect only 4. Okay, sorry, delta bicarb, sorry, pardon me. If anion gap, delta anion gap, that is, result is 20. Okay, expected is 12. So what is the delta anion gap? 8. So what should be the delta bicarb? 24 minus 8. Okay, that is 18. Sorry, 16. 24 minus 8 is 16. So the expected bicarb should be 16, but your bicarb is 10. What does that mean? There is some other acidosis. There is a normal anion gap metabolic acidosis along with a